Joel, welcome back to the Invisible Path.
Patrick, here we are.
Here we are, man.
It's
Beautiful,
early.
beautiful day.
It's early in the morning, and we are both scatterbrained a bit. And so this is the dedication we have for the Invisible Path.
Yeah, we were talking.
Yeah.
We were talking right before we pressed record that brains are scattered, so it'll be a fun time.
Yeah.
So right out of the gate, fun time. We got an email from Tommy Pickles, who I believe is a character on Rugrats, who wants to know from you, Joel. It says, Joel, you mentioned a tray you kept at your office that you'd fill with ice and dunk your face into. Did anyone ever walk in on you doing this? And if so, how did that conversation go?
Oh, for sure. I try not to be that much of an exhibitionist, but for sure. And it was during like the real peak of I don't even know what's happening with Wim Hof these days, but there was definitely awareness even by people not really in the biohacking scene that like, oh, cold showers, cold stuff, that's something good. So people generally leave me alone. That, I mean, some people would want to know what it's about, and really with that, it seems like a shortcut to sort of calm down the vagus nerve, which travels through your body, throughout your body. But you can certainly send a powerful signal to it to help the rest of your body calm down if you're just freezing your face. Because why in nature would you just be freezing your face? It signals the rest of your body to kind of chill out a bit. So I suppose it was a doorway into a larger conversation with people, or conversely, a good signal for them that like, this is not my kind of person. This is a weirdo. And then that was also a very efficient and effective thing too. So it works both ways. So you want to attract your people, and you want to repel other people as well, or at least let them just be repelled. That's fine. Everyone should just self-organize. So I find it strange how reserved people are, and people do not really open up all the time. They don't necessarily want to be vulnerable when it comes to sharing what they're about on any level. They keep fairly closed up. I think that's a natural thing. It's a protective thing, but trying to just push outside of that a little bit, just to share who you are or what you're doing to help yourself, and maybe that can help other people. People do not do that enough, and they keep it to themselves. Life is not as fun when you do that, right?
Constantly modifying for other people is a significant burden.
Yeah, it's like that. There's a Beatles song where I think it's John, says, "Well, you know that it's a fool who plays it cool by making his world a little colder," and that's what people are doing, right?
Yeah.
Especially today, I suppose. But try not to do that.
Yeah. So a real brief follow-up on that. And it goes back to your concept of the inner Yelp reviewer, right? Which is pushing that little amount of venom of negativity out into the world offers a dopamine hit. And I think we've said this probably directly, but it's just a great reminder. I've been thinking a lot about it this week, that you have the exact same opportunity to get the dopamine hit by being kind. Like you can get a dopamine hit by being an a-hole. You could also get a dopamine hit by being a really kind, genuine person to people. And there's just like, instead of making the world a little colder, you can make your world a little warmer and also feel good, and probably have a sustained opportunity to feel good, which may be better. As a little a tinge of a tinge of societal optimism from me.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like we talked about before, like be a big tipper. Like, okay, just it's some way to make a connection with someone, or if that's the way you can do it, or just reveal something about yourself to soften those edges a little bit, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay, second question comes in from no character name here, which, hey, if you want to do Rugrats character names, I'm into it. I don't know any of the others, but Tommy Pickles was something that I had to look up because it didn't seem like it was legit. Okay, so question comes in from Marco. It says, guys, I'm starting to think about what 2022 will look like in my life. What are you most excited about? What are you most worried about in your lives right now?
Oh, did you want me to answer that?
Yeah, for sure.
Ah, well, I mean, I don't know. For some reason, just because I have like the like invisible alien face sucker of the news just stuck on my face and in my brain all the time. I just immediately go to like, what's the political situation going to look like? What's the global kind of situation, and what's the financial situation? And more chaos. Like, I think people were surprised that 2021 delivered even more fantastically than 2020 in a lot of ways when it comes to just general chaos. And I would expect that to continue. I would expect 2024, man, if Orange Man runs for office, it's gonna be chaos. Anyways, okay, so anyway, so thinking about that stuff makes me feel pretty powerless, pretty filled with worries and anxiety. So I try to, in those better moments, focus on what are the goals moving forward? What can I do for myself and for my family to just keep pushing forward? Because you can't, I mean, the trap that it's so easy to get drawn into, because they'd like you to get drawn into it, is that you should join the fight. You should become loyal to one side and be the loyal opposition of another side. But it's really not going to help you a whole lot in your actual day-to-day life, I don't think. So for what I'm worried about, I don't know, just what everyone is seeing and what you can worry about there. For excitement, it is just continuing to grow various side projects. Certainly, Primal Cold and Optimus Red, I'm going to be focusing a lot on those and just seeing how many people I can help with that. And and then helping the family as well. I mean, yesterday, no, it was the day before that. It was Friday night. My younger son performed in front of like 500 to 600 people, and that terrifies the hell out of me. He loves it. Like he obviously was just it was someone who has like who's nervous before a large performance like that. They're going to be insufferable to be around, right? He, at least as a kid, like he's just complaining all the time. Oh, I hate this. This is the worst. I'm so nervous. And you just have to focus on like getting him fed. And then when he gets out there, that dopamine hit, as you say, right, that comes over. And it's so gratifying to just help another human being, especially a tiny human being that doesn't really know, that's still figuring stuff out, and you can help them out to achieve their goals. That's a beautiful thing. So what I'm most excited about really is helping my family members also with their goals. Super rewarding thing. So much fun.
Yeah. And probably, I mean, a thing that's available, even if you are in a position where you have no family members, there are people around you that can utilize your help, and that your help could immensely impact their life experience. So probably something that is available to all of us is this opportunity to really support support the people around us, and that only makes everyone's life better, which is a fun thing. So my excited is it's also growing, and really, probably the answer for everyone is expansion or growing in some way, right? Like me, I'm thinking about the literal things that I'm growing. Those things that I'm putting seeds into the ground, and yeah, I did a thing the other day about a 9-pound turnip, a 4-pound radish, and a 3-pound squash that I grew. And as I was just looking at the physical weight of a 4-pound, 3-foot long radish, and also like knowing the size of the seed that it came from, and the amount of carbon that came into the world from this little tiny seed that now is 4 pounds of mass that will biodegrade back into the soil here. And we got about 2 inches of rain over a 48-hour period. And because I'm in a place where the soil is essentially, a significant portion of the soil is clay, a lot of that water tends to run off. So the property right next door to me, they ended up with this massive amount of water runoff, and I had no water runoff, which means that the roots that I've put into the soil have started to make an impact in how the soil on my property is absorbing water, and that that's a nerdy thing to be excited about, but I'm super excited about.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
Man, you're sinking carbon, you're trapping water. That's a beautiful thing,
Yeah, all really important things.
Yeah.
And I guess on the I'll carry that into 2 things, because I think one of the things that I noticed this year was that my grow times were significantly longer than what would be expected per plant type. And as I thought about why that might be, I think it's very likely that the reason for that is June and July were essentially sunblocked, meaning that the forest fires from California and Canada blocked out the sun for about 2 months. And I started to realize that other farmers, people growing things, are going to start to have a lot of concern about the climate pretty quickly when they realize the direct impact that not having the sun shining down on their plants is going to cause on their pocketbooks, checkbooks. Because most of what I planted is not even almost everything I planted is 30 to 60 days behind where it should be. And I can't attribute, there's really nothing else I can point the finger at, other than the fact that we just had 2 months without having direct sunlight. Everything was diffused through a huge cloud of smoke. And that's not even the thing that I'm most worried about. The thing that I'm most worried about right now is, and you'll have to tell me if the news is talking about this at all, but I'm worried about the significant amount of pressure on the entire system. So I did a thought experiment about a month ago now, where I imagined what would have happened in March of 2020 if the people in the grocery stores, the employees at the grocery stores, decided they weren't going to come in. They just said, no, we're not going to do it. And the only thing I could come to in that conclusion is we would have lost society, because when there's a shortage of food and water, I don't think people are going to play that nicely. And now I'm just I'm looking at supply chain shortages in my business world, in my personal world, and realizing that essentially the entire chain of supply that has been getting goods to Americans, again, I get it. It's very egocentric, but America is the place where I live, so I just don't have the experience outside of America that I should have, or maybe I shouldn't have. I don't know. It's hard to live in more than one place at the same time. But if we look at what the entire chain of necessary components to get goods to humans right now, that has been under full tension for almost 2 years now. And when I think about how long a human can go at full capacity, so if I'm like put in a space where I have to go full capacity, for me, it's about 1.5 years. So to me, we are like coming up on the point where humans start to break under the pressure of being under full tension constantly. And if any part of the supply chain breaks down, we are in a situation where we don't have goods for humans. And I'm really concerned that every part of the chain has been under tension for 2 years. The likelihood that it breaks somewhere seems pretty high to me. So is there any news coverage of, is that a thing that the news is talking about in any way?
Oh God, no.
Okay.
No, that's far too complex. That's I mean, okay, a little bit. I'll say a little bit.
Okay.
But but I would say it's, you know, it's usually, the stories are usually narrative driven and not very nuanced, and you really don't, the news doesn't want to just scare people for no good reason at all.
Yeah.
And they like to scare people to drive towards a certain outcome, but not for just no reason at all. And so, you know, people, you know, you're going to notice, hey, the shelves don't quite have as much food as they did before. There's some empty holes in the shelves. It gets back to that normalcy bias that we talked about previously, where you sort of learn to accept that, and you're like, well, okay, that's just how it is now. But with, you know, with these systems, it's not necessarily like it's going to just kind of linearly continue along like that. As you say, you can have a really fragile system with a lot of interdependent systems, and it's like an exponential decay curve. It looks mostly flat and horizontal until it just sort of rounds off and falls down off a cliff. And you don't really know. We're certainly nearing that corner of the cliff, but you don't know what that means. Is that days, months, weeks, years? We don't really know what that is exactly time-wise. And it's not, you know, it's going to happen in different locations in different ways. You know, we've talked before about like, well, get a deeper pantry, you know, stock away some food and supplies. In in Russia, so today we have just-in-time inventory. We have just-in-time delivery for everything.
Yeah.
And during the rush, and that's a problem. That's the problem for Fragility. And during like the Russian collapse, you didn't have just-in-time delivery. So the businesses that could keep on running were the ones that just had a bunch of inventory laying around. So if you had a very inefficient kind of business, you got all this extra stuff laying around before, that was a real pain in the butt. But during the collapse, oh my gosh, now all of a sudden that was a real godsend. That was a huge help to yourself, your business, the community. But here we don't have that. I can't grow really much of anything in Flagstaff unless I want to get really crazy with it. And most people don't grow things. Obviously, Patrick, you know, you're an outlier there, right? In modern day America. And I suspect that that's done with a lot of intention, and it probably helps dial back any sort of baseline level of anxiety that a person would have, just to know during these sort of fragile times here that you've got some kind of base of support. Um, you've got some water, you're figuring that out. You've got the food figured out. And so, no, the news is not talking about this generally, though. They'll talk about how, well, there's a bunch of container ships that are held up in the Los Angeles port, and why can't they, there's a big blockade there, or not a blockade, there's just so many ships. There's a big bottleneck there. But the larger story there of, well, why is it that we are importing everything from overseas? Why is it that we don't make anything or as much as we used to? And why are we, kind of like heroin addicts, hooked on cheap products made overseas? That's not a discussion that happens in the news, because that's far too nuanced and doesn't really meet any particular aim that they would like to meet. We haven't even talked about the topic of this episode. I don't know if we want to continue to
yeah.
We're gonna have to wait and see what the feedback is. We have a bit of a lag here. We're gonna have to see what the feedback is on that Doomer episode we put out. Let's see if people want more of that, or if we've lost everybody by now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think I spent a lot of time thinking about that, because I do think it is interesting, right? It's there is a level of like escapism that's important, I think, because if you spend all your time in an all-consuming space worried about every possible outcome, things are going to not be fun. So there is a level of escapism that I do think is important within the podcasting space specifically, right? I know I'll seek out escapism from podcasts when I just need to tune my brain into a different frequency. And then there's also like this if you have something that may be beneficial, or if you can receive something that may be beneficial for you. And I think, putting a couple backup sets of whatever it is that is vitally important to you in your storage space might be worth it right now. Worst case scenario, you have a couple of extra things of things that are really important to you. But yeah, so this week, the one thing I know we're going to talk about is, what do we need, right? The big question is, what do we need? Is that a fair representation of the question you left us on?
Absolutely. And I think I'd mentioned, really the way that came about was I'd asked about what's the best way for people to get into your world and what you're doing with teaching and classes and all of that, because beyond the necessities to keep your ass alive, you're going to need something more, right? Because we don't live on bread alone. And so that's from you, and just also dig into that a bit, because as we go into these challenging times, if your mental game is not sorted out, and if a lot of the more human aspects, the more emotional and human aspects aren't sorted out, and you don't have those pieces together, you could have all the guns and butter in the world, but you still might crack up in a different sort of way.
Yeah. I think that's a thing that nobody ever really preps on, right? Is an interesting thing. It's like the mental component of what would be experienced in a time of societal collapse, right? Everybody thinks, well, if I have my food and my guns, I'm good. But there's a psychological reality to being human, and if we're not protective of the like psychological framework, not only is it not worth doing, but the like breakdown that happens is probably more devastating than anything you can even conceive of. So what so let me rephrase this so I understand your question, which is, how does someone get involved in mental protection, maybe?
Where, we could take this in a number of different ways, in a number of different directions. So if you have a place you want to take it, then take it there and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a fun, broad place to start from, is how we offer some level of protection for the brain. And one of the things that I think I'm honing in on is the way in which we speak to ourselves from a perspective standpoint. Meaning that if you are speaking to yourself exclusively, or when you are speaking to yourself in first person, because I know most people don't exclusively speak to themselves in first person, but when you are speaking to yourself in first person, you are creating an interaction with yourself that is vastly different than if you are speaking to yourself in third person, right? If you are saying, hey, I need to do this, or you are saying, Patrick, you need to do this, second or third person. Those are really different ways of communicating with yourself. So there is a different level of acknowledgement and responsibility when you are speaking to yourself in the first person, when you are saying, I am in this place. And there's a different level of escapism or excusism when you are calling yourself by your name, or a nickname or some derogatory name that you've given yourself to speak to yourself within your brain. So one of the things that I've really been honing in on is how we can get people to start thinking more in first person, and how that changes the way that the internal workings of a brain creates an external expression of the world. So let me just stop and pause there and just check in with you, Joel. Does that make any sense at all? Is there any sense to you in like how different it is to speak first and third person, or first, second, and third person?
No, I've never thought about this before. And what I think is interesting is that you've talked before about how you don't have much of an inner dialogue, and how your mental chatter is very quiet. And my first reaction to this was that I thought you were going to talk about people's, how people can tend to have negative inner dialogue. And it reminds me of a meme that one of my kids showed me, and it says, you win $50,000, but in order to receive it, the person that you hate most gets $100,000. And then the best reply to this was, great, I get $150,000. So anyways, please expand on this now, because I want to know this Jedi trick. Although I think probably I speak to myself in the first person, but tell me more about this. This is pretty interesting.
Okay, so two things. I just saw that meme, but I saw it with, I get $3 million and the person I hate most gets $10 million. And my only reaction was, great. I don't care if somebody else has more money than me. I get free $3 million. Sign me up for that deal. Okay, so I'm starting to theorize. This is an interesting thing. We've never talked about this. So most people, essentially everyone that I've asked the question to, speaks to themselves semi frequently in first person, more often than not in second or third person. My thinking on this is just starting to formulate, but I do think that when you are speaking to yourself in first person, when you are acknowledging and accepting that you are the one who has done these things, even criticism that you offer yourself, there's nothing derogatory in saying, I screwed that up. I did this wrong, right? There is just an acknowledgement and an understanding. But if you take yourself into, if I say, and I don't even like, so I had never had I don't think I'd ever had a second or third person thought cycle through my brain until I had this conversation. I think with Brian, we were playing disc golf, and then I threw a bad shot, and just as like a way to try it out, I was like, I can't believe you did that, Patrick. And then I started to get these like this thought pattern where I would be referencing myself as my name, and I did not like it. So like just allowing the thought into my brain that it is possible to think of myself in a second or third person started to seep in, and I had to like form walls around it to protect it. I think when you're speaking to yourself in first person, you can only appreciate what has actually happened. You can't really come up with you can't say you. So the moment you say you, we're out of first person and we're in the second. So you can't really come up with a criticism other than what you have or haven't done. And if you are working with the things that you have or haven't done, then I don't really view those as, even if you were thinking negatively, that just means that something went wrong in your life, right? Which things are going to go wrong in your life. But once you start applying this you terminology, then it's like you are pushing the blame onto someone else. And then some people will come up, like a lot of people that I have this conversation with come up with derogatory nicknames that they reference themselves as within their inner dialogue. So it's like, you piece of blank. And then we're into like a really different conversation that you're having with yourself. So if you take out second and third person conversations that you're having about yourself within yourself, and you only have first person conversations about who you actually are and what you've actually done, I think that the way you interact with your brain is vastly different. If you are speaking about what is and what isn't, as opposed to whatever negative connotations you might dream up about the piece of blank that you are.
I wonder if, first of all, I'd get $13 million. That's awesome. But I wonder if, I wonder if that second and third person thing, if it's almost like it seems like it's linked to maybe childhood, and you're talking to yourself in the way that you would hear your parents scold you, right? And so you're recreating that and embedding that into some thought loops, right? So, because that's where, as a child, that's where you're getting all your feedback. So maybe it stems from that. Yeah.
I think there's definitely something to that, because I know a lot, there are very common, there are very similar threads where people do reference like ideas that they've heard as children, repeating back in their brain as adults. Yeah, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about how my brain started down this first person path. And I go back, childhood, I think, definitely plays a role. I think, as you've called out earlier, there's just a primitiveness to the way that functionality, right? There's like a simplistic primitiveness to only thinking as an individualistic being. So I think there's some level of just like not being all that sophisticated that helps in that process, that makes that process really easy for my brain. But I also think it's something that can't, like, I think it can be trained in a way as well, because I do think, I know when I started to get this second person ideology creeping in, I could feel it. I could feel it that it wasn't really me, and also that I didn't want it. So I think you can train these ideas too. So yeah,
is it,
tell me.
Is it is it like a difference in how it is you're viewing the adoption of responsibility and what it is you need to get done in your life? Is that what you're picking out with this? Like if you're referring to yourself in second or third person, maybe you're just, internally whipping yourself, but you're maybe not, you're doing it just for the sheer pleasure of like self-hatred, but not
Yeah.
actually doing it in a way that helps you get anything done. Is that where this is going?
So
Is that what you've kind of
So
gleaned
that's what
from
I
this?
think I'm honing in on. What I think I'm honing
Yeah.
in on is second and third person. There's a dopamine response, right? There just is. There's even the self whipping, right? The self torment. There's a component where it like kicks up some chemical response in you that makes you want to do it, but it also offers you an excuse, right? You also have put an excuse into your cognitive function that says like you can't do this because you're a piece of blank. And yeah, like if you never think that way, there is still failure, but there is no excuse that is outside of who you are, right? Like you have to take responsibility. If you're like, I'm going to do this, and then you do this thing and it turns out to be a complete disaster. If I say, oh, Patrick, you screwed that up, that's like me referencing another being and saying like that other being screwed this thing up, but no other being screwed the thing up. I screwed the thing up. Like I did the thing wrong. I started a project, it was a complete failure. And if I just take that on and I just, hey, I screwed that up, that wasn't a failure, it was a failure, it's really easy to move on, right? Because I don't have this like I haven't put it in a capsule that's like pushed off to another side that's just waiting to come back on me. I've just said, yeah, I effed up. This didn't work out, and then I'm done with it. Like I'm done with it because I've completely accepted that I screwed this up. It was 100% me, and I'm done.
So this gets back to something. If you go back to what happened before you were whipping yourself for screwing up, what
Yeah,
it gets to is something that's really important that people need, which is that they do need an ideal, they need a goal, they need a target,
yeah,
uh, and they need some growth, right? And in some way that they can envision some little corner of the world sucking less, being
yeah,
better because of something they did. Um, and that is certainly something that people need. Um, and and I think what's been ingrained in us for a long time culturally is that responsibility is um, a shackle and it's limiting and it's a drag, but really it is freedom. If you don't even have freedom to have some kind of control and control over your own domain, then what do you have? And so thinking about that intentionally and thinking about what you would like to do and how you could move towards that is something that we all need. And especially if you are just tuning into the headlines and you're feeling helpless and you're waiting for someone else to like make things better.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
that is not happening. My gosh. So
yeah,
and even if that is what happens, whatever, you still need to be in control of things. You're going to be happier if you do that. But the ideals today, because we've talked a lot about in previous episodes about like how important that is to have a goal and to grow, but the ideals today are just at the surface level are just so terrible that are out there. There's some TV show, I don't even know the name of it, but I have enough awareness to know that it's out there. I think it's Korean, and it's about a bunch of people who, it's just fiction, it's some dystopian story, a bunch of people who are in a lot of financial debt, and then they're brought in to be part of essentially this game show. And if you lose, and you don't get closer to winning the money that's going to save you, then you die. And so it's
Mm.
like, these are the ideals that are just so, they're so coarse, right? They're so simplistic. And and so you got to serve somebody, right? There's like some, I think it was in his later career, but Bob Dylan had a song where he says, you got to serve somebody. It may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you got to serve somebody. And you just think about how everyone is just chasing, not everyone, but it's so easy to buy into the culture's idea of what your goals should be and what you should be chasing. Um, and the reason why they put those ideals out there of going for the Lambo or whatever is because it serves their purpose. It serves their needs, not yours.
Mm-hmm.
And so unpacking that a bit and being intentional about what it is that you actually do need is so vital.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And really being clear about your needs, right? Because the reality is, a Lamborghini might look like really shiny and beautiful, but it is not within anyone's needs. There's not a need for a Lamborghini. You may be able to come up with something if you get real creative.
Man, a pickup truck though. I mean, you can't, like, how many bales of hay can you move with a Lambo? Like, you can't, like,
It's true.
if stuff goes Mad Max, you're going to want something with more clearance and more towing capacity and more carrying capacity. So get a crappy old pickup truck.
It's true. Get a crappy old pickup truck, convert it to natural gas, get an
There you
800-gallon tank, put it in the bed. You're going to be able to drive much longer than anybody else.
I like this. I'm taking notes. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that like the clarity of needs is another thing that is really valuable, right? Is can you separate out the things you want from the things you need? And I used to do this thing when I would do my body composition challenges, which was just remind people that if you can walk to your refrigerator, open the doors, look inside, and see that nothing looks good, then you're not hungry. You're having a craving. And that we can do very similar things with tangible goods, right? It's like, can you look around your house at like all the billions of things you've bought and put in, and if none of those things like excite you, then you don't really have a need for them, but also for new things, right? You have enough stuff. You're just looking for the new shiny instantaneous craving filler. So that like the ability to separate those two ideas, it's pretty easy with food, but it's harder with tangible goods, because whatever, you see a new electric kettle and you're like, well, shoot, like, it takes me 10 minutes to boil water, but I could do it in a minute and 30 seconds with an electric kettle. That's pretty good.
I think it goes back to like the opposable thumb and our brains. I mean, we like product fetishism is just so real and it's
Mm.
everywhere. People love things that are hard to come by and
Yeah.
that's, somehow fit into their story. I mean, a lot of this is just because we have so much surplus in the world. I mean, you see some of the crazy things that people will pay money for, and just stupid money for. It's just because there's so much money in the system right now. But I mean, what we lack right now, and I think what we need, God, the arrogance of giving advice just cracks me up right now. So I'll put that disclaimer out there, right? But it's like we have this disconnect with with reality that I think is pretty strong, and there needs to be some kind of like reunification with the reality of productive work. Like, there are so many people that have a BS job and they know they do, and it makes them feel not so great. And then they're
Sure.
trying to figure out, well, what do I do? And the fact is that there's just so many things out there that you can do for a living that have not a whole lot to do with reality in a
Yeah.
sense, right? And part of this is just because we live in such a time of abundance, but we also have such a confused or misaligned sort of value system, a value system that is more aligned with just productivity for the sake of productivity and growth for the sake of growth, as opposed to any kind of humanness, I suppose. And it's making, I think it is, you can see the cracks where it is making people crazy because they know that they're living in a dishonest culture and a dishonest society to some degree.
Yeah.
And so then you have to find the others. I think that's why people are finding you.
Mm. Okay, so pretty interesting, pretty on point with what's going on in my real life right now, which is always fun. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about a community, and so the yoga studio called Vitality had this really amazing community, and I've been thinking a lot about that community specifically in how like impactful it is to me. And I still get together. There's like a cycling group of about 40 people who get together and practice yoga on Sundays and Mondays online. And I just got a note from somebody who was a member of Vitality, who was telling me, you know, like they've been looking to find a community that was like the Vitality community since it closed, and they've really struggled at doing that. And she said, you know, you're the best at creating community, and I'm not the best. I'm not the best at creating community. What happens, or what can happen in a community, I think, is someone and there's someone has to be there has to be someone who is an encapsulation of enough energy and force to start something, right? That has to happen for a community to be built. But once someone has like expended their energy and force into creating this spark, the people that gather bring their own energy, and that energy attracts other people. And so what I told her is, you know, I'm like, this is nothing to do with me. It is you are the one who created this community, right? You brought energy, and that energy attracted other like energy like you, and then you guys all got together and made this really beautiful thing. And there was a specialness to that community that I think about, because as I put myself in other places that have seemingly like-minded beings that would be attracted to it, they're not, it's not the same group. And part of that, I think, is individualistic and egocentric, in that Vitality was a creation of my brain, a reflection of my being. Every single word that was on the website was written by me. Every single graphic was designed by me. Every single photo was taken by me. And therefore, the people that were attracted to that were similar to me in a way, right? They were attracted to something that was within me, and that made that group really special to me. But it's really nice to hear that it was also special to other people, because I get so much joy just thinking about this group all the time. So I think there's like a bunch of things in that. One is, if you want to create a community, like, you do have to, I think, if you want to create a community, you have to be willing to put the energy in to making it happen. And I also think, so I keep, this idea keeps coming up because it's something that I think about a lot, which is like, if you could create a communal living space, right? Every single communal living space, and whatever word I'm looking for here is not popping up, but if every single one gets corrupted, right? It's very similar to gurus, is that there's a requirement of force and energy that to start these things. They get corrupted because nobody ever turns over the power back to the group, right? The person who puts in the time and energy and effort and probably financial resources is like, well, I did this, like I created this thing and now I should reap the rewards. But the reality is the reward is the community. The reward is the community. So I think about this in the cult world, whatever, like how you could legislate Osho's camp in Montana. Was it Montana? It might have been Washington. Oregon.
Yeah.
I always think about, like, because there are so many people that loved him and loved that experience. And even as he drove 17 Rolls Royces, they still like thought that his decision making was infallible. So I always think about what would happen if you got someone who was willing to put in that much energy and then also legislate out any corruption ideas. Like, start this thing and put it in and get it to where it is immaculate and beautiful. And then instead of feeding off the power, just walk away. Just write down some rules on a piece of paper and say, here's the guidelines. I'm just one of you now.
Oh, it would fail. Like, for it would fail quickly. So here's, well, maybe not. Okay.
Hey, America's taken several hundred years.
What I'm thinking, yeah. What I'm thinking about is the way that you bring the people in and who you're attracting is very important. And when if you're a strong figurehead, you're the guru of a group, the people that you're attracting, like, and I'm talking about like cult level stuff, right? Not what you put together here, but like someone who's a real cult leader. They're attracting, every single person that they're attracting self-identifies as being incomplete and needing something from this other person and from this group. And so I think that kind of community is a hard thing to keep going unless you do have the king essentially at the top. And so the problem is there's this impulse to put that together because we lack an authentic community, and a like self-emerging community, and those went away with the advent of the suburbs. Those went away when we were able to have a BS job that wasn't really linked to productive living and doing something real, like, digging potatoes out of the ground. And my gosh, I'm glad I don't have to dig any potatoes out of the ground for a living. That being said, though, the price you pay for that, it seems, is, at least with how things are organized now, is that you are divorced somewhat from the real foundation of like life and what keeps us alive. And so you no longer have a small village where you've got a baker and you've got farmers and you've got the blacksmith, right? Like, that is what it's like. We have this yearning to get back to that. We know we've lost something in a way, and we're trying to create a synthetic version of that. And that can be a hard thing to do, because what you really need is a bunch of people who are selfishly interested in their own betterment, but know that they have all these people around them that also have things that they need. And so it's an interlocking community, but we don't have that. So now we're struggling to try to cobble something together and then, come up with rules, and maybe this will work. But maybe I'm just too cynical about that, but it's something that we've lost. We've lost this sort of authentic way of relating to reality,
Hmm.
and now we're trying to figure out, well, how do we get that back? And it may be that we get that back because things, you know, decay to such a degree that we don't have a choice.
Hmm.
That may be where the authentic community comes from. It's
Yeah.
not some kumbaya thing.
Yeah.
It's more like, how do you keep the wolves at bay, and you have to work together with those in your community to make that happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did I totally burst your bubble there, man?
No, I think it's an interesting so I look at the way that and we talked about this maybe last week, the framers of the American political system, and their amazing foresight, right? I think if you had a collection of people who were focused on legislating out corruption, um, and that was their goal. So no system can withstand corruption forever, right? We get money and power involved, and it things have proven that corruption is the more powerful being. But I do still think that there's a way. I don't think that there's a likely possibility, because I see. So I think the biggest problem is more likely the fact that anyone who's willing to put in that much energy, right? Like anyone who has that much drive and desire within them is very unlikely to then be like, yeah, I did this thing, I'm good, and I'll just walk away. Um, so I think maybe there's bigger problems than I ever imagined, right? If I take into consideration your problems of the systemic just fallacy of it working, um, maybe there's an even bigger problem than the unlikelihood of someone being willing to put in the time and energy and then walk away. Um, so, so that might be a pretty good fantasy.
It's, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's a worthy goal, right? Um, but it seems like when things self-organize, it's much more resilient. And when
Yeah.
there's just one figurehead trying to organize it, I mean, it's hard to. I don't know. I know I'm not smart enough to figure that out. Like, especially with the whole human, all the different kind of human personalities and what you're attracting when you try to build something like that.
Okay,
Um,
so let
but
me let me offer then. So I think I have a great couple counterpoints here,
yeah,
right?
fix
So
it. Tell me how we build the utopia.
no, I don't think we could do that. But I well, that's not, I mean,
Why not?
we definitely have the resources, we definitely have the capability. Like, we have all the ingredients for building utopia. I think that's a very important thing. All the ingredients are readily accessible to the human race right now. But here's what I will say about self-organized versus constructed, right? Is we can look at every single organized religion, and they have all very successfully maintained a societal function for thousands of years now. So there is a thread that can hold these groups together. The communicated acceptance of the supernatural is it's a very powerful thread. It's a very powerful thread when you start tying things together, and
Yeah,
people start communicating acceptance of things that are beyond perception. You start to create factions and fractions within society that are bound together at supernatural strengths. And as I say that, I start to get more terrified with the realization that we are definitely experiencing a new fractioning and new factions within society based upon things that cannot be based upon the communicated acceptance of supernatural belief. And that is probably something for an episode that isn't this one, Joel, because that is a pretty deep conversation. That is definitely more gloom and dooming. When I start running those simulations out in my head, I start to have some pretty good worries. So any bows that we can put on this conversation today to wrap things up?
Yeah, well, what do people need? That was the working title for this. I mean, I think what people need that we're missing are probably values that are invisible to the culture.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This is what you're pointing at. You can't sell a lot of gadgets with the idea of transcendence.
Yeah. That is definitely true. Although I will say, there's a lot of companies starting to get into that now, right? Like vibrating meditation pillows are a thing that keeps popping up on my Instagram feed. Yeah. Yeah, but I think that is kind of the thing, right? Is the reality of the things that we need they are less tangible than we might imagine they are. We are certainly less tangible than capitalism wants us to believe. The things that we need are pretty hard to buy, aside from food, right? Aside from shelter, which are things that we've made into things we need to buy, right? Because we roll back the clock 120 years and people were getting together as a community, erecting a house for a newlywed couple in 2 days, and people were moving into that place, planting a garden and doing their thing. So the things we need may be less consumable than we've imagined them to be in our current world. And that's something to think about over the course of the next couple of weeks.
You certainly need that community, and to get back to your aspirations, I think, or I don't know, interests. I think we talked about this before, about how the Mormons were more successful than anybody else at creating cities and towns.
Yeah.
And the reason was because they had a blueprint, and they would figure out how much land they needed for a particular site, how much land they needed to dedicate towards growing crops, what buildings were first to put in, what were the first skill sets that people needed to have. So you have to, if you're going to just instantly create a town, you've got to have a blacksmith, you've got to have, the farmer, the whatever. You need all those interlocking parts. And so, but they did that they took care of all those mundane, practical things to support something that was larger, something that was invisible.
Mm. Yeah. Right back to the invisible path. Okay, Joel, thank you so much. We'll do this again. We'll be back with you guys in 10 days. Check out the YouTube. Press the like button on the YouTube. Subscribe to that thing, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks a lot, Patrick.
Thank you. And one thing for the post show here. Anybody, I'm working on another concept here. Starting to see some interesting things developing in people's physical extremities post experience with COVID, which is disc pain in your back, musculature tendon insertion pain at joints, and joint swelling. and I'm trying to get some feedback on how widespread that is. So if you have experienced something and in discomfort in the physical body that you are kind of writing off as, oh, I'm just getting old, think back to if that makes sense. I'm starting to pick up some patterns here that I want to dig into. So if you're experiencing that, send me a note. Let's chat.